Hello, Ben. It's lovely to see you.
Hiya,
And welcome
it's
to Coffee
great to
Chats
see
with
you.
Professionals.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, really excited.
And I'm really, really happy that you joined. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you so much.
So
And how are you doing?
I am just been quite busy. Like the last time we
Yeah.
saw each other, after that, it's been quite a roller coaster. There's been so much going on. But how have you been?
Yeah, same, I think. Life is a roller
Yeah,
coaster, isn't it,
it
really?
is. It
And,
is. I mean,
there's
we're
always so much going on.
we're just going on with it, aren't we?
But I have got my cup of tea. I've followed the instructions.
Oh, same here, same here. Thank you so much.
That was my existential dilemma. Do I have coffee or do I have tea? It's 5 o'clock in the evening, so I've opted for tea.
Oh, that's lovely. Honestly, that's lovely. I would like to start this podcast with a few questions about yourself. Yeah,
Lovely.
we have seen that you are the director and the CEO. So, how did you actually start your journey into mental health and what drew you to this field?
Oh, wow, that's a deep question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that probably started quite early on in my life, if I'm honest. And I think I was partly drawn to it and probably partly guided to it. I think, like a lot of people that work in mental health, they often have that kind of streak in them where they want to help people, they have compassion for people, they have a kind of deep desire to understand people and to understand what's going on for people. And I think I experienced that from quite an early age. I think I attracted people to me that had challenges in their lives. And for whatever reason, I'm probably still working that one out. Um, People came to me looking for some sort of support, counsel, guidance, that type of thing. And that happened to me when I was at school. It happened to me in my kind of early adult life. I think when I was at sixth form, I was studying sociology at the time. And actually, one of my teachers at the time said, you keep writing these essays, but they're not really about kind of society. They're more about people. They're more about individuals, what's going on for individuals. He said, you ought to do psychology. So that's kind of where I ended up. So I went down that kind of route. And then from having studied psychology at university, I mean, I was doing placements whilst I was on my course. But I then went into working into the voluntary sector really, and that's kind of where I've gone, and I've had loads of great opportunities along the way.
It seems like it was a natural calling for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think very much so. Um, I think I've always been really interested in people and how people tick. And I've been really interested in people's differences and people's similarities, what brings people together, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it's definitely a calling, probably a vocation.
Definitely, that's definitely the truth because you do have this energy around you, a very calm, and that when, if somebody's speaking to you, they would feel they're in a safe environment that they can speak and be themselves. Because I never felt
Oh,
that I would have to be very aware or wary in front of you. I could just be
right, yeah.
myself. And yeah, you have this kind of energy that makes people feel comfortable. So I can definitely see you having that from a very young age. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, well,
But that's the truth. I mean, yeah.
thank
So
you.
you have spent 25 years in mental health and substance use,
Yeah.
criminal justice. That's a long time. And
It's
what experiences have you faced that stands out the most, that defines your experience?
Uh, I think there's so many experiences, really. I mean, it's interesting you asked me about what kind of brought me into this type of work. So, I think there are moments in your life where things happen and it kind of guides or directs you to certain things. But I can remember I think I must have been about 11 or 12 going to the one of the museums in London and meeting somebody. And this is quite a difficult story in some ways, but he was a guy that had fought in the Falklands War, and he had a very traumatic experience, as you might imagine, for a lot of people that, you know, are kind of in warfare. And there was an exhibition on at the time about paintings from the Falklands War. They had a war artist who was exhibiting, and he'd gone to have a look at this exhibition. And he took me around this exhibition. I mean, I was 12 years old at the time. He probably wouldn't be allowed to do that now, but for some reason he kind of was attracted to me, came up to me, showed me around this exhibition. And and I learned a lot from him in that moment because he talked about the trauma that he'd experienced, and his kind of story, his journey and what he'd experienced has stayed with me throughout my life. And I think it was one of those things where you kind of realize that actually there are people around you that have had all sorts of different experiences, some deeply traumatic experiences. And it taught me to kind of tune into that and realize that actually you couldn't make assumptions about people. You had to be alongside people and learn from them and understand about their experiences. And it was, you know, it's very easy to make judgments about people when you meet them, but you have to find a way of kind of almost stepping out of that and being with them and finding out what's gone on. And, you know, people don't make decisions early in life that they're going to have really difficult lives and they're going to have really complex problems and challenges in life. You know, most people, and this is a bit of a cliche, but most people have some sort of dream or aspiration of what they want to be when they grow up. You know, you talk to children and they'll be like, oh, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a sports star or a celebrity of some kind, or whatever it is. And then kind of life gets in the way for people sometimes. And I think I've been really, really privileged because I've met some fascinating people in my life that are going through really complex challenges, complex situations or circumstances, but they've had the courage to kind of share their experiences. And I never take that for granted. I'm always in awe of people that have the courage to talk about what they've been through, to share it, and you know, to open up and, you know, not necessarily to ask me for help, but to be kind of open to help from other people, whoever that is. So lots of different experiences. I've met amazing people. I've been coached and encouraged by amazing people that I look up to. You know, the list goes on and on. But that was one of my starting points in life.
Yeah.
This chap that I met who'd had a really, really tough life.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's wonderfully said, Ben. And honestly, I think I have learned that as well. While I was really young, but my experience was a bit different. It was when I was in karate class, and
Okay.
yeah, you wouldn't expect that person to be so amazing in karate and have such disciplined mind when you look at them.
Yes.
That was my experience of it. Don't judge people. That person would be walking in front of you in the road and you wouldn't know that person is amazing in karate or can do so much amazing stunts and has such discipline
Yeah.
in their minds.
And talent is such an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I deeply believe that we're all hugely talented. Some of us have had the opportunity to explore our talents. So you just
Mhm.
mentioned karate there, and that's something that's
Yeah.
kind of really, you know, been a feature of your life and energized you and shown you all sorts of things. I've
Mhm.
had all sorts of opportunities to discover talents, and I'm also aware that there's lots of people out there that still haven't discovered their talents yet.
Mhm.
And it's such a gift. And if you can be with somebody and help them to recognize, even if they don't think they've got a talent, but if you can help them to realize actually they've got that gift or that thing that maybe somebody else hasn't got, but they've got it,
Mhm.
that's a really profound experience. And I'm a, you know, an absolute believer that, you know, we've all got all sorts of talents, some of which are hidden, some of which have been suppressed out of us. But the job of all of us is to try and help everyone to discover or rediscover those talents.
Yeah, that's just so lovely because I think a little push, a little encouragement goes a long way because a lot of times we feel like, okay, we cannot go on with our lives, we cannot achieve something, or we are just failures, although we have so much potential. So if there's someone like you who can push a person, just encourage them a bit, they would feel like their world has changed, and that's insanely helpful. And I have faced it myself, so I know how helpful it can be when there's just even just one person trying to encourage you, trying to tell you that it's okay, you've got this, you're good enough, and you can go on. That makes the entire difference.
Having people around you that believe in you is really important, because I think, I think in life we all have, what we often describe as limiting beliefs, and those things that get in the way, that tell you you can't do something, or you're not good enough, or you don't deserve to be here in this space. All of those kind of little things that sort of flit into your mind, and sometimes those things are kind of cemented at quite an early age for people. But being able to try and challenge those for ourselves, but also to have people that are champions or guides or supporters that are alongside you that can help you to do that, I think is really important. And I think that's where, when you think about things like karate, having coaches that can kind of train you and teach you and support you and give you that little bit of encouragement and confidence when perhaps you might be lacking it a little bit yourself, is huge. It's a real gift.
It is. You have worked alongside with colleagues and communities facing such challenges. So, what common mental health struggle have you seen in this space?
I think it's a massive, massive subject, and I guess for me, having worked in the sector for quite a number of years, I sometimes hear the conversations that I encountered when I first started working in this sector kind of almost coming around full circle. So you find yourself talking about the same things that were still problematic 20 plus years ago, coming up time and time again. And I think sometimes that can be frustrating. And I think sometimes it can be about systems, systems that don't work for people, systems that weren't working for people 20 odd years ago, still not working for people and still getting in the way. And I think we have to kind of think about things on lots of different levels. I think there's a responsibility we all have as individuals to try and do what we can to improve our own lives and to try and make the best of our experiences. But also there are systems and barriers that get in the way. So things like discrimination, for example, is a big one, and that gets in the way of lots of people's lives. And I'm acutely conscious for myself that I'm somebody that has certain privileges in my life that other people don't have, and therefore that doesn't mean my life is necessarily always going to be easy, but my starting position is different from other people, and some other people's starting position is way back. So for me, some of that's about how can we encourage that conversation of dismantling some of those barriers and systemic things that get in the way of people. One of my big passions, obviously, with my kind of background in substance use work, is I'm acutely aware that the whole paradigm that we operate under in terms of drugs legislation works completely against people and criminalizes people and oppresses people, suppresses people in lots and lots of different ways. So that's a big one for me. We need to try and rethink our whole approach to the way that we look at this whole issue of drugs. We look at production, supply, and ultimately use of drugs. And we need to do something to kind of challenge the system, because we're operating under an antiquated system that's been around. Well, it's been around for well over a century, but particularly in the last 50 years, we're working within a kind of legislative framework that has not helped people. It's actually made the situation worse. So for me, I'm kind of arguing and campaigning for change in legislation that could actually help people to overcome some of their challenges in their lives. So things like that. I mean, it's a massive, massive issue. I think there's things that we can all do personally, but I think we also need systems that work for us that help us as well, not get in the way.
Exactly. I don't think people realize it. We live in our own world, we live in our own structure. So we
Yeah.
forget that there are people who might be having such issues that they cannot even move forward with their lives. The
Yeah.
usual living conditions can be so bad for them. And
Yeah.
has it been difficult for you to work through it? Has it been a challenge to kind of try and change that system?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, it can be hugely challenging. It can be hugely taxing. I heard a quote the other day from somebody that was talking about burnout. And burnout is this kind of thing that, a lot of us are aware of in terms of our own kind of emotional state and how we keep ourselves well when we're working in um, a sector that's supporting people that have had very difficult traumas in their lives. So when you're hearing a lot of trauma and when you're seeing people in a lot of trauma, that kind of, how do I keep myself well in that? And actually, this person was kind of turning it on its head a little bit and saying, I'm not burnt out because of, the work that I'm doing. I'm feeling burnt out because of the systems that I'm trying to operate in that aren't working for people. And I thought, oh, well, that's a really interesting thing
That's
because,
deep. Yeah.
yeah, because actually for me, that's often where sometimes those feelings of burnout come from. It's like, I want to do this thing, I want to change, I want to help, I want to support, but actually things are getting in the way that aren't working.
Yeah.
So it's, that, yeah, that's an interesting thing, I think.
That's a very serious issue that is basically overlooked. Maybe the system is not changing. And if you're saying that that has been the same in 20 years, then it's a bigger issue
Yeah.
because if the same thing
Yeah.
keeps turning and we are in 2025 and so much has changed, we have so much social media power, we have so much connections, we have LinkedIn, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, and even then if the system is not changing, then what can we actually do to change the system? What can we do to help people in a way that actually changes their life in a better way?
Yeah.
That is such a big question.
Yeah. And I think, there's kind of some interesting things to kind of think about when we talk about, what needs to change. And I don't know if you've read some of the work by Johan Hari. He wrote a book a few years ago called Lost Connections, and he was talking about the whole kind of paradigm around mental health and around psychiatry and around medication. And he's very clear that, there are circumstances where things like medication are really important for people. But in his own experience, he talks about how, as a young man, he experienced depression, and the doctor said to him, basically, you've got a chemical imbalance. Some people don't have this chemical imbalance, but you do. And therefore, you need to take medication to top up your brain chemistry. And that was kind of my experience growing up in the 90s when I went to the doctor feeling anxious and experiencing depression. And they said to me the same thing. Oh, well, you've just got this chemical imbalance. You need to take some medication. And so for many, many years, I was taking medication where actually underneath it all, I think there was some challenges that I'd experienced growing up that I needed to kind of work through. There was some things around kind of my identity that I probably needed to work through. And also, and this is one of the things that Johan Hari talks a lot about, is about connections. And I think, we've lived in a society, particularly in the UK over the last maybe 40 years, where some of those connections have kind of been fragmented. And having grown up in the 1980s as a child, under the Thatcher government, and this isn't a political point particularly, but that kind of dismantling of aspects of society and aspects of community. And she was a great proponent of the individual. The individual has to take responsibility. It was always about the individual. But actually, community is really, really important. And if you dismantle community, the effect of that, I think, is that it has a big impact on people's mental health and well-being. So we need to try and find ways of supporting people in whatever shape or form to find connections, whatever that connection is that's meaningful for that person. You talked about martial arts, and
Yeah.
that's a community. I do martial arts, and there's a community there that I'm part of.
Yeah.
But for lots of people, I think they've lost that sense of community. They've become more and more isolated. And that doesn't mean to say that everybody's got to have the same community. If you've got a community of two or three people that you trust and you meet up or you have chats online, that's community.
Yeah.
Some people are part of much, much bigger communities. And all of those things are good, but it's how do we find that kind of route back to something that's really meaningful and purposeful in our lives, and find that community that supports it.
That is very true. In fact, especially after coming back from UK, I have been talking about this quite a lot, that talk to people you trust, talk to people that make you
Yeah,
feel at home, talk to people because you never know. Maybe your problems will not be solved, but when you are speaking to somebody and that person feels like they're safe to be with, it can feel better. It can actually make you mentally better. And I have faced that, I have experienced that, and I only share what I have experienced myself.
yes,
Otherwise, it just be like, oh, you haven't experienced it yourself. How can you suggest that? I think even in UK, although I didn't know anyone, although I was completely new in a different city so many times, but the people that I had over there, the people I could speak to, I could also speak to you. And it was so nice, especially when I'm going through something and it's difficult to talk about it. When somebody comes up and asks, are you all right? It just makes a
yeah,
whole lot of difference. It actually feels like you belong somewhere. And even if the
yeah,
problem is not solved, you feel at least I'm strong enough or I'm mentally healthy enough to be able to deal with it. I think community is very, very important. We need to look for it. I think everyone wants community, but I just feel like they're too shy, or they just feel like, oh, maybe the other person doesn't want it, or maybe a community would not want them. That's not the truth. Everybody wants
yeah.
to feel connected to someone or a group of people.
Yeah, I heard somebody talking about finding their tribe, and and I like that expression because your tribe can be anything, can't it?
Exactly.
I love being around people, but I also like being on my own. I
Mhm.
also like having time to myself, and I like stepping out and
Yeah.
meeting new people. But then I also like kind of just going back into my quiet little space and just having my time to think and reflect on my own. And that's okay, and I think everybody needs to find their kind of comfort zone with how they find their tribe, how they find their community, and not put pressure on themselves or expectations on themselves that it's got to be one way or the other.
Yeah.
That's that thing about kind of not feeling judged. It's about being seen, being heard, and not being judged. And I think that's really important as well.
You work in such a high pressure field. How do you support your mental health? And how do you see other people supporting their mental health in such high pressure organizations or work?
Well, that's a challenge. I think, I mean, I have lots of mechanisms for looking after my own well-being, and I have to, like everybody, I think I have to try and protect those um, mechanisms that I have. And by protecting, I mean allowing time and space, because that's always a challenge. There's
Mhm.
always things that will try and come in and take up your time, or if I just do this, or if I spend a little bit more time at work doing that, or those sorts of things. But for me personally, I do lots and lots of things to manage my well-being. I do martial arts, so I
Oh,
do karate as well.
lovely.
I've been doing that since I was in my kind of mid-20s. So that's a kind of a lifelong passion. I play guitar, which is also really good for my well-being. It can frustrate me enormously, but at the same time, it's wonderful. It gets you in the zone, gets you in a rhythm.
Mhm.
Um, More recently, I think in the last kind of year, I've been doing a lot more meditation. And I find that's been really, really helpful for my well-being as well. Um, and connecting, all of those other nice things like connecting with community, connecting with friends, family, those sorts of things, I think are also really important. I love music, so going to see live music. I'm slightly too old to be in the mosh pit nowadays, but I kind of stand just to the side, so I like sort of loud, noisy punk music and things like that. And but it's for me, it's about finding something that's good for your soul.
Yeah,
That nourishes you. And you can talk to a million people and they'll all have different things, but
exactly.
whatever that thing is, it's giving space and time to it that's really important. And that's kind of what I encourage my friends and colleagues to do as well,
That's true.
is make sure you create space for yourself, because it's very easy to give to others,
Yeah.
but if you don't allow time for yourself, then you will run your battery right down. And actually, if you have got a driver to help and support others, it will limit that because
Mm-hmm.
you're not well enough yourself to be able to do that. So
Yeah, that is beautifully said. You have to take care of yourself first. Otherwise, you can't take care of anyone else. And I can see the guitar behind you. And
oh yes.
I was very curious. Like, okay, so he plays the guitar.
Don't ask me to play. Don't ask me to
No,
play.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that
I've
because you
got
said
three
it's
more
on.
guitars over here as well.
That's lovely.
So
But yeah, that's beautifully said. Self-care is very important because you are a person as well. So you gotta take care of yourself as well. You are your own responsibility. You have experience with drugs and policy, drug legislation. So how has this policies shaped society's response to drug use, or how does it help, or how does it kind of withdraws people from understanding drug use or the effects of it?
yeah, so it's an interesting one. If I kind of like rewind a little bit on that. So when I was in my 20s, I was doing outreach work with people that had substance use issues and mental health issues, and a lot of the time I was just trying to find a way of getting my foot in the door with people that had really complex lives, chasing around Kensington and Chelsea, knocking on doors, trying to speak to people, trying to help them. And then I kind of got involved in delivering training, so training on basic drug awareness, but also drugs policy. And through that, people started to ask, okay, so, how long has drug use been criminalized or drug possession been criminalized? And as I started to kind of look into that, what I started to realize was that I was completely naive. So I thought that drugs legislation was there to try and keep people safe, it was to try and stop people experiencing harm. What I realized as I kind of researched more and more into this was drugs legislation was never about that. It was always about shifting changes in society. It was about society's attitudes towards minoritized people. So early drugs legislation in the early part of the 20th century really came about because of themes like women becoming emancipated. So actresses in like the early 1900s who were, socializing, making lots of money, kind of mixing with different communities, taking drugs. Paternalistic society kind of caught onto this and wanted to stamp down on it because they wanted to suppress people. And they didn't want women becoming emancipated, for example. Later, it was about migration. It was about communities migrating across the globe. People, Mexican communities moving into America, Chinese communities moving into America, different communities moving into Britain, sort of in post kind of colonial sort of Britain. And one of the ways in which society tried to control groups and to kind of whip up concern and discrimination was to latch onto this idea of drugs, that people would be bringing drugs into society, into Britain or into America. So a lot of drugs legislation's roots was actually in racism. It was in misogyny. It was in homophobia. All of those sorts of kind of themes, and it was never really about actually whether or not these things that people were taking were harmful for them.
Yeah.
So that was like a big awakening for me. And when I started to realize that was the case, I kind of started to realize actually, there are elements of control within society about how we, manage certain parts of the community. And for me, a lot of people that have had problematic experiences with drugs in their lives are often people that don't have a platform to talk about their experiences. They don't have the same power, they don't have the same voice, and legislation doesn't help with that. Legislation kind of perpetuates a paradigm in which people are continually criminalized.
Interesting.
And if you look in, and this is probably a point, particularly about America, but also about, I think, increasingly the UK, the kind of history of custodial sentencing in America, particularly, we have mass incarceration in America, and a significant percentage of those people are incarcerated are from minoritized communities, black communities, for example. And over the years, there's been disproportionate sentencing for communities according to different types of drugs. And that has had a massive effect on minoritized communities in the States. But it also has a massive impact in this country as well, where you see different approaches with policing towards black members of the community compared to white members of the community. And those sorts of things are kind of perpetuated and are very much a feature of kind of drugs legislation that needs to be unpicked, in my view. It needs to be challenged, and we need to have a approach to legislation that is evidence based, not based on discrimination, not based on, a century and a half of kind of prohibition that doesn't actually work for people. It makes the problem worse.
If they're discriminated that much, it definitely has a big impact on their mental health, isn't it?
Yes.
So, do you see that these people who are discriminated more, they have more mental health issues, and are they open about it, or do they hide it, or what do you experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think undoubtedly the impact on people's mental health is huge, and often it's very easy to look at the issue of drugs when actually underneath that there's all sorts of other issues like discrimination, for example, or poverty. And actually, in order to help people and support people, we need to really under tackle some of those underpinning issues and concerns that are impacting on people's lives. So how do we challenge discrimination? How do we challenge poverty? How do we make sure people have fair and equitable access to really good quality housing and support? How do we make sure that people have a platform to get out of poverty that works for them?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is increasingly challenging. I mean, you mentioned some of the things earlier about things like social media. And I think we live in a society where, airtime is dominated by little sound bites. And little sound bites can be really challenging because actually, when we're talking about very, very complex issues like poverty and discrimination, a little soundbite doesn't do it justice. We have to get underneath the issue. But for some politicians, and in a world that's quite divisive, and we're seeing that massively at the moment, where there's so much polarization in attitudes and so much division, it's very easy for somebody to come out with a soundbite that sounds tough, like let's be tough on drugs, or let's be tough on immigration, let's be tough on all of these sorts of issues. Actually, they're really, really complex issues, and we need to, instead of giving airtime to little sound bites that sound tough or sound convincing, actually let's really get underneath what are the real issues that are causing these problems, and how do we actually as a society come together to try and challenge those issues and make things better, not just for those people, but for all of us, because actually better outcomes for one group of people usually ends up with better outcomes for everyone.
That's so true. What about the Museum of Drugs? How did you come up with the idea? What inspired you? Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so that really came about, as I was saying, with the kind of questions that I was getting asked when I was delivering drugs policy training. I started to look around for artifacts that would help me to understand and explore these issues. Now, I am a bit of a self-confessed geek. I love collecting. I've always had that kind of little drive in me where if I get onto a subject, I go deep into it and I get fascinated, and, I'll go down lots of little wormholes and start, finding out more and more information. So it's a little bit of how my brain operates. So I started collecting things, and what I found online was that I could start collecting things like opium pipes from the 19th century, laudanum bottles from the 19th century, all sorts of newspaper articles, stories, just things that I started collecting. And as I started to collect them, I started to tell the story of what these object artifacts, newspaper articles, what they all kind of meant. And it really tells the story of society's attitudes, very much like I was saying earlier about how, things were changing in society in the Edwardian times in the late 19th century Britain, early 20th century Britain. So it was kind of using these artifacts to tell a story. And I brought them into my training a little bit, but then over time I decided I was going to set up a website so that I could kind of share this story with other people, because it surprised me when I learned about it. So I thought, well, it's probably going to surprise a lot of people. Other people, no doubt, made similar assumptions to me about why drugs legislation was in place. So I used the collection to kind of tell the story, and then I set it up as a charity. And since setting it up as a charity, I've done talks and lectures. I've been working with different universities. So I did some work with the University of Delaware in America when they used to come over to London during the summer. Most recently, I've been doing some work with the University of Warwick with Ben Smith, one of the professors there. And that's been fascinating, working with their students who've been using the collection to tell their own kind of narratives about drugs history. And we've got some aspirations and some plans for doing some more of that work next year as well, which is really exciting. So that's kind of where it comes from. And I'm a great believer that museums have a really important role in challenging history. So, in this country, we've got museums that, have a real colonial history. I mean, a lot of their artifacts are collected from colonial times. And actually, it's really important. I think they have a responsibility to use those collections to challenge some of the impacts of colonialism. And I think the same is true of the collection that I've got. It's about using that collection to say, actually, we live under a paradigm that is based on discrimination. And if legislation is based on discrimination, we have to unpick it. If you don't unpick it, then you're signing up for more discrimination. So I use it as a kind of activist tool, if you like, to tell this story, but also to say to people, actually, we've got to challenge the status quo. We can't stay under this paradigm that continues to discriminate and oppress people.
That is 100% true. And it is such a lovely thing that you're doing. It is inspiring. I think it comes from such motivation and strong will that it shows. It kind of shows that you have this passion for creating a change, creating awareness. And I think
Yeah,
will start from people knowing more about certain things. If people are not aware that there is a problem, then how will you solve it? We have to know that there is
yeah,
a problem. And I think you are bringing out that problem into society, and then people might come up with a solution like, okay, this is how we can deal with it. Maybe a bigger community. Like what you're doing is actually forming a big community of people who are passionate just like you. I think you are being a change maker here. I just love that.
thank you. I have a kind of strong social justice drive in me,
Right.
and actually through this work, I've found there is a huge community out there that are all kind of campaigning in different ways for changes in drugs legislation. There's organisations like Transform. There's organisations like Anyone's Child, which is families who've been affected by the loss of somebody who died as a result of, for example, a drugs overdose, and they're campaigning to say, actually, we have to have a system that allows control of dangerous substances. At the moment, we're handing control to criminal networks that sell and supply these products. Actually, we need to bring them under the same sorts of controls that we have with things like alcohol, for example.
Right.
So if I go to the supermarket and buy alcohol, I can tell what percentage it is. I can tell whether it's going to be okay for me or not okay for me. I know that if I drink too much of it, it's dangerous, that sort of thing. We have to have kind of similar controls around all substances that are managed as health issues, not managed as criminal justice issues. And that's kind of the network that I've found, the community out there that I really love being part of is people that are kind of similarly passionate and want to change things for the better.
So I assume that you already have people who support this cause and who are very much like-minded. So the reaction after you forming this charity has been quite good.
Yeah, it's been really good. I mean, it takes you to some really interesting places and you get to
Mhm.
meet some really interesting
Yeah.
people. I mean,
Yeah.
the professor from Warwick University, Ben Smith, I mean, he's done a lot of work in Mexico. He's written books on cartels in Mexico. He's met people, he's interviewed people, he's met some, fascinating people around the world. So just talking to him, I mean, I hooked up with him on Friday and, just had the best day chatting to him and learning from his kind of experiences. But there's lots of people out there, and, that's one of the joys if you have a passion and you can find other people that share that passion, whether it's around a sport or a subject matter, or whether it's about mental health if that's your passion, or
Yeah.
whether it's about coaching or anything like that. Whatever it is, if you can find that connection, then you can meet some amazing people in life.
That's true. People who are working in frontline roles and people who are in mental health, what would you recommend for them to do to stay resilient and avoid burnout, just as we were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that affects all of us. And, we all have mental health, we all have mental well-being, we all have certain things about our personalities and our lives that, either work well for us or sometimes they work against us. So I'm a great believer personally that in developing some insight. Insight into myself is really important. I've spent a lifetime so far learning about myself and learning about things that work for me and don't work for me. I'm still learning about that. It's a constant, a constant thing.
Mm.
So I think, it takes courage sometimes, I think, for people to develop insight and to find out about themselves. Sometimes people don't want to go there. Sometimes it can be a little bit scary, but I would always encourage people, if they can, to step in. There's Brené Brown talks about courage and vulnerability, and I think that's a really important thing. I think she says you can't have courage without vulnerability, and I agree with that. And I think if you're going to try and develop insight and look into yourself and try and develop yourself, it does take courage, but it also comes with a little bit of fear and a bit of vulnerability. So I would say to people, try not to be put off by that. Allow yourself to feel vulnerable. That's okay. We all feel vulnerable at times. Um, I would, encourage people to find their talents, to seek out their talents and be relentless in trying to find their talents. Don't give up on that. And I would try and encourage people to find their community, whatever that is, or whoever that community or wherever that community is. And, not to give up on that as well. I can be a little bit of an introvert at times. It
Yeah.
takes me something to step out of myself sometimes.
Yeah.
But actually, when I do, and I do find my tribe, they're the best people ever for me, and I love those people. Um, and they also know me well enough to know that sometimes I like to step back into my little quiet space and have a bit of time to myself as well.
Mhm.
So I think, for people, just finding their space in life, finding their rhythm, finding the things that give them joy and give them hope is really important. And also, I would just throw in a little bit of activism as well. Sometimes if the system's not working for you, you know, get activist about it and develop hope by, doing your bit to challenge what's not working out there, and find the courage to do that.
That's great.
That's quite a bundle of things there.
Yeah, but they are also helpful. I could write those down and follow them. And I think it would personally help me. Okay, find your community, get involved more, take time for yourself. Everything that you said kind of sums up how you can be healthier in your own mind and also help people in the best way possible. I think it just gives a summary of how you can be more productive or more healthy mentally. Everything that you said makes so much sense, and the experiences that you have, it just
Yeah,
it's so insightful. So for the
yeah.
museum of drugs, what's next for it? Like where do you see it going, and how do you want to elevate or increase your impact through it?
Okay, so as it stands at the moment, it's a website. It's established as a charity, so we've got a charitable purpose and mission. Um, the the ambition, the goal, the drive, what's going to happen in the future is it's going to have a permanent base somewhere.
Amazing.
And that's really important. I would like it to have a base on the high street somewhere. And, that might be a shop, it might be a cafe, it might be something like that where people can come, they can spend time, they can look at the exhibits in a kind of an environment, in a space. But I'd also like it to be a space where people can come and get help as well. So I love that kind of intersection between kind of museums, heritage, culture, and also a space where people can come and feel safe and not be judged. So coming into a museum space like that in a physical location where somebody could come and say, actually, do you know what? I'm a bit worried about what's going on in my life and I feel like I need some help. Or I've got a family member and I'm a little bit concerned. And coming into a space where there's kind of history, where it's kind of looking at it from a slightly different angle, a very non-judgmental perspective, I would hope will kind of create that sort of space. So that's where I see it going, and that's the ambition for the next couple of years. Really, is let's try and make this a physical space where people can come, where it can be innovative, creative, and just get people talking. Because when people talk,
Yeah.
you find out so much about them, and you can push back on any assumptions that you make about people. You learn about them, you learn who they are, and I would really like the museum to be that kind of space where people can come to and share and learn and find out.
That is such a great idea. I am glad I asked that question because I'm interested. I'm very much interested to see where it goes. And I think if there's a safe space where people can also talk about this, because I think if we are just sitting randomly at a cafe and we are talking about this, it will sound very I don't know, out of place. It will sound like, and for a
Yeah,
lot of people, it's still a taboo. People don't talk about these things. So if
yeah,
there's
it's
a
still a
safe
difficult
space,
subject.
yeah, exactly. So if there's a safe space, just as you said, you are planning to do, people can go there and
Yeah,
connect with people. And if they want to form a community over there, they could do that where they can find help. I think that would provide such a environment that people just can be themselves without any judgment.
absolutely. And I'd like it to be a place where people can have debate as well, because that's really important. If we're going to challenge, you know, the status quo, then we need to have discussion and debate about it and, work out what's going to work. So being able to bring other people into that environment, various experts in the field, people that have really looked at legislation and understand it, and get them kind of debating and helping society and helping the community to rethink actually what's going to work. That would be a joy for me.
The ambition you have, the idea or the vision you have, it is actually a change maker that can make such a big change and such a big impact. And I cannot wait to see it. I am hoping that, I
Yeah.
get to be one of the first people to witness it.
I'm looking for collaborators as well. I have talents in some areas, but I don't have talents in all areas. None of us do. So, having people out there that are interested, that can collaborate, that can help,
Mhm.
I'm really open to that because I know I can't do everything myself. So,
Amazing.
one of the nice things about coming on coming into this space, coming on podcasts and things like that is, you reach out to the universe and you reach out to other people that are out there that go, do you know what? I could help with this, or I could do something, or this fascinates me and I'd like to get involved.
So,
So,
yeah.
so I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk. And, yeah, and inspired by what you do as well. I've been following your story on LinkedIn, and it's fantastic. You're involved in so much, and you're so ambitious to kind of create change as well, and to create space where people can talk and where things that are taboo can be discussed. I think is brilliant. So, well done to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. It means so much coming from you because you are an inspiration. You are such a good soul, and it just means a lot. Thank you so much. Going back to mental health, how do you see the future of mental health or substance use services evolving in the next 10 years? Like you said, it's been stationary or just been stagnant. People have been facing the same issues. So, how do you see mental health changing?
Wow, that's a big question. Do I know the answer to that question? I'm not sure.
Well, that's
I think,
okay. Question though.
I mean, there are brilliant things happening around the world, and whilst there are a lot of big challenges, there are brilliant things happening as well. You hear more voices of people who haven't had a voice in the past, communities that haven't had a voice in the past, speaking out now, being able to talk about what their experiences are, being able to talk about what they need rather than what they're prescribed or what they're offered. You can have this, or you can have that, or you can have nothing. Actually, people saying, well, that doesn't work for me. Actually, I need services that look like this. I need services that are going to spend time with me, that are going to get to know me, that are going to understand my trauma.
Yeah.
They're not just going to tell me that, something's wrong with me. They're going to actually listen and spend time with me. And for me, that's got to be the direction where things go. There's got to be much more, openness to kind of listening and learning rather than prescribing to people. I think there has to be, much more kind of creativity and people being willing to try new ways of working and understanding and learning from people. We were talking about substance use earlier, and there's a whole movement around kind of psychedelic substances that might have positive impacts for people that have experienced trauma, that have experienced difficult times in their life, that might have had really chronic depression, and we're entering a space now where for many years it was completely prohibited. We couldn't talk about psychedelic substances, but now actually we are, and there's research happening at Imperial University and lots of other universities around the world into the effects of these things. And actually, could they help us? Could they help society? Could they help individuals to overcome traumas? So I can see lots of things that are happening that kind of give me hope. I think what we have to be careful as a society of doing is not watering those things down too much. Make sure we give time and space to learning about these things, and not trying to sort of water it down into a kind of tiny little thing. So, sometimes, I mean, I grew up in an era where cognitive behavioral therapy was kind of the big thing. And I've got a lot of time for cognitive behavioral therapy, and I've got a lot of time for all sorts of different counseling therapies as well as things like mindfulness and meditation, those sorts of things. So all of these things are kind of like really important. But sometimes in society, we get ourselves to a place where we get really prescriptive about those things. So you can have 6 sessions only of this thing, or you can try this for a few weeks, and then that's all you're getting. I think we need to try and be really open to, giving people the time that they need to heal, particularly if they've had traumatic experiences in their lives. If you've had a childhood of trauma, 6 sessions of something isn't going to be the panacea for that. We've got to really get underneath things and try and find ways of really learning from people and understanding what their experiences are and the impacts of those experiences have had on them, and the profound healing that comes from kind of really sitting alongside people and listening to them and giving them that space to talk about their experiences and validating their experiences as well. So I'm a great believer in kind of talking therapies and things like that. I'm a great believer in coaching. I'm learning a lot about coaching at the moment, and about kind of mind and body, and how that needs to be much more connected than I think it probably has been in my life.
Yeah.
So there's lots of positive things to hang on to. I mean, the support has to come from government. The support has to come from legislation change. The support has to come from the right strategies. But we have to be careful not to kind of, over strategize things. We have to kind of give space and time to the things that actually we already know work for people. Giving people space for community, giving people space to be able to talk about their experiences, giving space for people being able to identify them for themselves, what's going to work for them as an individual, rather than telling people that, you need to do this or you need to do that. Actually, let's find out from people. They know best.
Exactly. Yeah. It's more being on a human level rather than, oh, you just get 6 weeks to heal, and if you don't heal in 6 weeks, you are done. You're done with us.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think that's a great perspective, because a lot of systems revolve around that okay, you get this certain amount of time and certain amount of attention, and then after that, we are not responsible for you. So I think
yeah,
what you're saying is very relevant, because we have to see people as people rather than a project or a subject. That
yeah,
makes complete sense. And hopefully that goes further, and mental health, the services can change, and people can be more engaged and can have more human connection.
mm,
That would create a big ripple, big impact on society. And I think if communities can form, just like you said previously, then hopefully people will feel more connected, and people will feel more aware of themselves, especially if there is somebody you trust and that person is telling you that you can work on yourself. They are more
yeah,
likely to listen to them or understand that, okay, that person wants the best for me. So they're definitely not saying anything
yeah,
to hurt me or harm me. So that,
yeah.
yeah.
And there has to be a real reinvestment in community. I've seen communities being fragmented over many, many years. Actually, you can't just go back to people and say, well, you just need to form a community now.
Yeah.
Off you go. You have to really invest in that and give people the resources, the tools, the financial, mechanism, the platform, the space, all of those sorts of things to kind of create community where community has been eroded or no longer
Yeah.
exists. And that takes time and a lot of investment. And I'm not an expert in that. I would absolutely have to look to those communities and those people to say, I haven't got the answers.
Yeah.
Over to you. You need to tell me
Yeah. Yeah.
what you think are the solutions there, because I'm here for the ride and I'm here to learn.
Yeah. I get it.
And
That's
that
so
that
true.
takes a bit of humility. I think you have to be humble and and listen to people and find out.
That's true. That's true. Especially in case of such complex issues, it's very important to look at more perspectives, look at
Yeah.
more people, more opinions. That's how we connect. That's how we grow. So Ben, for the last question of the podcast or the session, is what one advice would you give everybody? Just based on whatever we talked about, based on men, what is the one advice that maybe changed your life or anything like that?
Um, the one bit of advice, blimey. I think it's really difficult to whittle things down to something kind of like, one bit of advice. But I think, you know, finding your talent, finding your joy, finding your community, finding your energy, what gives you energy, what gives you zest, what gives you motivation, what gives you courage, hope, all of those sorts of things, I think are really, really important. And I'm learning more about that at the moment, and I haven't formulated a kind of full response to it, but I'm doing some coaching at the moment called Zest Manifestation, which is run by an amazing person called Charlotte Carter. And I'm kind of learning a lot more about, sort of really tuning into kind of where your energy is and, using that energy, that drive that you have in you to kind of propel you forwards and finding the things that give you joy in life and staying in that space as much as possible. And it is a challenge because we all get thrown about, but trying to find that space, that thing that kind of gives you joy and hope, and keep going with it.
That is an amazing advice. That is an amazing advice, because I think we, even in the last podcast, I talked about that with Dr. Heather. We are running so much after something that we forget to stay still, think for a bit, feel for a bit, or just to enjoy the present moment, enjoy what we have, or to
Yeah.
understand what we are feeling personally, our own existence. I feel like, yeah, that's a brilliant advice, because people do need to just stop. They do need to understand what they want from their life, or how or what actually gives them joy.
Yeah.
That's brilliantly said. Thank you so much, Ben. And it has been lovely to speak to you, and it was a lovely chat. I've taken a lot of your time.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your presence. And
Thank you.
I'm meeting you after so long, and when I used to meet you previously, it used to feel calm and very pleasing, and I could just be myself, and I feel the same way
Brilliant.
now. So Ben, we will end the
That's lovely.
conversation. And anything that you want to say?
Uh, keep in touch. You know, it's
Yes,
lovely
100%.
catching up with you again. I feel the same with you. So, you know, kind of back at you. I've really appreciated the time, really appreciated getting to know you.
Yeah,
And yeah, let's stay in touch. Thank you so
amazing.
much.
I'll definitely stay in touch. 100%. Thank you so much,
Brilliant.
Ben. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.